The massive alien ship floated like a silver jewel against the black of space. Inside its crystal corridors, Ambassador Vethtar adjusted his ceremonial robes for the third time. His 6 arms moved with practiced grace as he reviewed the sacred first contact protocols that had been used for over 1,000 years. Everything must be perfect, he told his assistant Crixtal, whose insect-like eyes sparkled with nervous energy. The humans have been broadcasting beautiful music and messages of peace into space for decades. They are clearly a refined species of scholars and philosophers. Vethtar had studied every human transmission they could find. Classical symphonies that brought tears to his eyes. Mathematical equations that showed deep wisdom. Pictures of art and literature that spoke of a gentle, thoughtful people. He imagined meeting humans in flowing robes, carrying ancient books, speaking in careful, measured words about the meaning of life and the universe. The communication system crackled to life. Unknown vessel, this is Captain Lee Mina aboard the mining ship Iron Tiger. You folks seem to be lost out here. Need any help? Vethtar frowned. The voice was casual, almost rough. This was not what he expected from Earth's greatest philosophers. Perhaps it was a servant or god speaking first, as was proper in many cultures. Greetings, noble representatives of humanity, Vethtar replied in his most formal tone. I am Ambassador Vethtar of the Great Galactic Confederation. We have traveled far to meet your wise leaders and discuss joining our peaceful alliance of civilized worlds. A pause. Then the sound of laughter. Well, I'll be damned. Park, get over here. We got real aliens talking to us. The voice grew distant as the human called to someone else. Then it returned, clearer now. Sorry about that, Ambassador. Name's Lee Mina. I'm just a mining captain, but this is pretty exciting stuff. You want to come aboard our ship? Fair warning though, the coffee's strong enough to wake the dead and our gravity generator's been acting up all week. Vethtar's translator worked frantically to make sense of the strange phrases. Coffee? Gravity generator? This was not the elevated discourse he had prepared for. Perhaps there has been some mistake, Vethtar said carefully. We seek an audience with your planet's greatest diplomats and scholars. Surely you have wise leaders who handle such important matters. Another laugh. Buddy, I hate to break it to you, but I'm probably the closest thing to a diplomat you're gonna find out here. Unless you want to talk to Park Jiho, my engineer. He used to work for some government office before he got tired of all the paperwork and came out to mine asteroids with us. This was going very wrong. Vethtar had imagined stepping into halls of learning, meeting robed figures who would discuss philosophy and cosmic harmony. Instead, he was talking to someone who sounded like they worked with their hands. Very well, he said, trying to maintain his dignity. We shall visit your vessel to begin proper first contact procedures. Great. Dock on the starboard side. That's the right side if you're facing forward. And watch your head when you come through the airlock. We built this thing for humans, not for folks with extra arms. 30 minutes later, Vethtar found himself in what could only be described as organized chaos. The Iron Tiger was clearly a working ship. Tools hung on every wall. The air smelled of metal, oil, and something that might have been food. Strange music played from speakers, not the classical symphonies he knew, but something with heavy drums and electric guitars. Captain Lee Mina met them at the airlock. She was shorter than Vethtar had expected, wearing work clothes that had seen better days. Her hands were stained with grease, and she carried what looked like a repair tool. This was definitely not a philosopher. Welcome aboard, she said with a grin. Sorry about the mess. We just finished fixing a coolant leak. You folks want some coffee? Kim Sumi just made a fresh pot. Before Vethtar could answer, a woman appeared from deeper in the ship. She wiped flour from her hands and smiled warmly. Please, you must try some. And I have sandwiches if you are hungry. This is highly irregular, whispered Crixtal in Vethtar's ear. First contact should involve formal ceremonies, not food service. But something strange was happening. Despite his confusion, Vethtar found himself oddly comfortable. The humans were not what he expected, but they were genuinely friendly. Lee Mina was asking about their journey, showing real interest in their ship design. Kim Sumi was insisting they try her food, which smelled surprisingly good. So, said Lee Mina, settling into a chair that had clearly seen years of use, what's this about joining some galactic club? Sounds interesting, but I should probably warn you, Earth doesn't exactly have one government. We've got about 200 countries down there, and they don't always agree on things. Mars has its own council, and us asteroid miners pretty much govern ourselves. Hope that doesn't complicate your paperwork too much. Vethtar felt something like panic rising in his chest. No unified government? Multiple competing authorities? This was not covered in any protocol manual. But surely you have some central leadership, he managed to say. Nope, Lee Mina said cheerfully. But don't worry about it. We'll figure something out. We always do. Now, about that coffee. The formal first contact ceremony lasted exactly 17 minutes. It ended when Captain Lee Mina politely interrupted Ambassador Vethtar's carefully prepared speech about galactic harmony and cosmic brotherhood to offer him a sandwich. You've been talking for quite a while there, she said, pulling a wrapped package from her jacket pocket. Thought you might be getting hungry. Kim Sumi makes the best Kim Kai sandwiches this side of Mars. Vethtar's 6 arms froze in mid-gesture. In 300 years of diplomatic service, no one had ever offered him food during a formal ceremony. His assistant Krixtal made a choking sound that might have been shock or horror. This is not, we have protocols, Vethtar stammered. Protocols can wait, said Kim Sumi, appearing with a plate of neatly cut sandwiches. Food comes first. My grandmother always said you can't do good business on an empty stomach. She bowed slightly, a gesture that somehow managed to be both respectful and completely casual. Please, try one. It's a family recipe. The sandwich was unlike anything in Vethtar's experience. Spicy, tangy, with flavors that seemed to wake up parts of his mouth he didn't know existed. It was, he had to admit, quite good. Now then, said Lee Mina, settling back into her chair with her own sandwich, you were saying something about joining your space club? Sounds like it might be useful, but I should probably introduce you to the crew first. We're not exactly what you'd call typical Earth representatives. She gestured to a man working on a computer panel nearby. That's Park Ji-ho, our engineer. Used to work for the Seoul Space Authority before he got fed up with all the meetings and paperwork. Turns out he's better with machines than bureaucrats. Park looked up and nodded. Pleasure to meet you, Ambassador. Hope our ship didn't give you too much trouble on approach. The navigation system's been acting up since we hit that solar storm near Titan. And that's Choi Dae-ho over there, Lee continued, pointing to a middle-aged man studying star charts. He was a high school teacher for 20 years before he decided he wanted to see the galaxy firsthand. Best navigator we've ever had. Choi smiled and walked over, extending his hand in what Vethtar was learning was a human greeting gesture. Mathematics is the same everywhere, he said simply. Whether you're teaching kids about algebra or plotting courses between stars. The woman cooking something wonderful in the kitchen is Yang Hyojin, Lee went on. She owned 3 restaurants on Earth before she decided space food needed some serious improvement. Now she feeds miners and traders all across the outer system. From the kitchen came the sound of sizzling and the most amazing smells. Yang poked her head out and waved. Dinner will be ready in an hour. I'm making bulgogi. I hope you can eat meat. Vethtar's translator was working overtime trying to process all this information. These humans seemed to treat him like a neighbor who had dropped by for a visit, not like a representative of galactic civilization making first contact. There's also Lim Yoan, Lee added, nodding toward a quiet man checking some kind of weapon system. His previous job was classified, but let's just say he's very good at keeping us safe. Now he maintains our defense systems and grows the best tomatoes you've ever tasted in the hydroponics bay. Lim looked up briefly, nodded once at the aliens, and went back to his work. He didn't seem unfriendly, just focused. This is all very informal, said Krixtal nervously. On most worlds, first contact involves government officials, ceremonial guards, formal presentations. Well, we're not most worlds, laughed Park Ji-ho. Earth's got about 200 different countries, and they can barely agree on what day it is. Mars declared independence 15 years ago and set up their own council. The asteroid belt miners vote on everything, and the outer colonies pretty much do whatever they want. Vethtar felt something like panic building in his chest. But surely you have some central authority? Some unified leadership? Nope, said Lee Mina cheerfully. And honestly, it works out better that way. When you try to get everyone to agree on everything, nothing ever gets done. This way, different groups can make their own deals and figure out what works best for them. But how do you make decisions about joining the Confederation? Asked Vethtar. Who has the authority to speak for humanity? The crew exchanged glances and started laughing. Not mocking laughter, but the kind that comes from genuine amusement. That's the thing, said Choi Dae-ho. Nobody speaks for all of humanity. We speak for ourselves, and other groups speak for themselves. If your confederation wants to deal with humans, you'll need to talk to a lot of different people. Earth will send their own diplomats, added Park Ji-ho. Mars will probably want separate negotiations. The mining guilds will each want their own deals. And the colony ships that left for other systems? They're making their own rules out there. Vethtar sat down heavily in one of the human chairs. This was not how first contact was supposed to work. There should be clear hierarchies, established protocols, orderly procedures. Instead, he was eating delicious food in a mining ship's common room, talking to former teachers and restaurant owners who treated meeting aliens like it happened every day. The strangest part was how comfortable it all felt. 3 weeks later, the formal diplomatic station Galactic Confluence looked nothing like the sterile, organized facility Ambassador Vethtar had known for decades. The main conference hall, usually filled with neat rows of chairs and hushed, respectful voices, now buzzed with activity that bordered on chaos. The humans had arrived in force, but not at all how Vethtar had expected. Instead of one unified delegation, 12 different groups had shown up, each claiming to represent different parts of humanity. Earth had sent 3 separate teams who couldn't agree on lunch, let alone galactic policy. Mars had 2 delegates who kept arguing about mining rights. The asteroid belt workers had chosen their representatives by drawing names from a hat. Captain Lee Mina stood in the center of it all, looking completely unbothered by the confusion around her. She was reading the 847-page treaty document that had taken the Confederation's best legal minds 6 months to prepare. "You seriously expect us to sign this without reading it?" she asked, holding up the thick stack of papers. "Where I come from, that's how people get cheated. How about we talk about this over dinner instead?" Vethtar felt one of his headaches coming on. "Captain Lee, this is a formal treaty ceremony. We have procedures, traditions that go back thousands of years. And I'm sure they work great for you," Lee replied with a smile. "But we do things differently. Food helps people think better. Makes everyone more friendly too." Before Vethtar could protest, Yang Hyojin and her team had transformed half the conference room into something that looked like a street festival. Tables appeared covered with dishes that filled the air with incredible smells. The humans had somehow convinced the station's food service to let them use the kitchens, and now alien diplomats were staring in confusion at grilled meat, colorful vegetables, and bottles of something the humans called soju. "This is unprecedented," whispered Crixtal, watching as the crystalline Vithari delegates approached one of the food tables with obvious curiosity. The Vithari haven't spoken informally to other species in 3 centuries. "Look at them," Vethtar murmured back, amazed. The usually silent Vithari were actually asking questions about the food. One of them was even attempting to smile, which looked bizarre on their crystal faces but somehow seemed genuine. The chaos got worse when the humans' actual political situation became clear. The Earth delegates couldn't agree on basic principles. The Mars representatives wanted completely different things from what Earth wanted. The asteroid miners seemed more interested in the food than the treaty. And the outer colony delegates kept pointing out that they had left Earth specifically to get away from big government decisions. "So let me understand this correctly," said Vethtar, addressing the crowd of human representatives. "You want to join the Confederation, but none of you can agree on terms, and some of you don't want to join at all." "That's about right," said Park Ji-ho, raising a glass of soju. "Welcome to democracy, alien style." "But how can we make an agreement with humanity if humanity can't agree with itself?" asked Ambassador Zelfion of the Helix Collective, her gaseous form rippling with confusion. "Easy," said Lee Mina. "You make different agreements with different groups. Some of us want trade deals, some want technology sharing, some just want to be left alone. Why does everyone have to want the same thing?" This was exactly what Vethtar had been afraid of. In the corner, he could see Admiral Greth of the Thorcan Empire talking loudly about how proper civilizations had clear chain of command. The insect-like delegates from Kepler Prime were clicking their mandibles in what he recognized as deep confusion. The real crisis came when Choi Dae-ho, the former teacher, started explaining human history to a group of young alien diplomats. He was using simple words and drawing pictures on a napkin, showing how humans had always lived in different groups with different ideas. "You see," he was saying, "humans spread all over Earth thousands of years ago. Each group developed their own ways of doing things. Different languages, different foods, different governments. We've been trying to work together for centuries, but we've never all agreed on everything." "But surely that creates conflict," said one of the young diplomats, a tentacled being from the outer spiral. "Oh, it does," Choi admitted. "We've fought plenty of wars. But we've also learned that different approaches to problems can be useful. When one group's way doesn't work, another group might have a better idea." Meanwhile, Yang Hyojin was teaching a group of silicon-based life forms how to appreciate the concept of flavor, even though they didn't technically eat food. Lim Yoan was discussing defense strategies with military delegates, finding common ground over shared concerns about piracy and resource protection. The strangest thing was that it was working. Despite the complete breakdown of formal protocol, species that had barely spoken to each other in decades were having actual conversations. The Vithari were asking the Helix Collective about their philosophy. The Thorcan military officers were sharing war stories with human veterans. "This is chaos," muttered Vethta to himself. "Is it though?" asked Li Mina, appearing beside him with a plate of food. "Look around. When's the last time you saw this many different species actually talking to each other instead of just making formal speeches?" She was right. The careful, polite distance that usually marked Confederation gatherings had somehow dissolved. Aliens were laughing at human jokes. Humans were asking genuine questions about alien cultures. Problems that had seemed impossible to solve were being discussed over shared meals. "We still need to resolve the treaty issue," Vethta said weakly. "We will," Li assured him. "Just not the way you expected." The solution to the galaxy's oldest diplomatic crisis came from the most unlikely source imaginable, a slightly drunk human engineer with strong opinions about neighborhood disputes. It was our six of what the humans cheerfully called the party and what Ambassador Vethta privately thought of as the complete collapse of diplomatic civilization. The formal treaty signing had been forgotten entirely. Instead, representatives from dozens of species were scattered around tables, eating human food and having conversations that would have been impossible in any official setting. In one corner, Admiral Greth of the Thorcan Empire was getting louder by the minute. His massive, armored form towered over the table as he slammed one heavy fist down, making the dishes rattle. "For 300 years, the Helix scum have been stealing from rightful Thorcan territory," he roared. "They mine our asteroids, claim our trade routes, and hide behind their peaceful philosophy when we demand justice." Across the table, Whisper of Stars rippled with indignation. The gaseous being's form shifted colors from calm blue to angry red as she responded. "The Thorcan speak of ownership, but space belongs to no one. These resources exist for all thinking beings to share. Your empire's hunger for conquest disgusts us." This was the argument that had been going on for centuries. The Thorcan Empire claimed traditional territorial rights to a huge section of space. The Helix Collective believed in shared resources and peaceful cooperation. Confederation mediators had spent decades trying to find a compromise, but neither side would budge. Park Ji-ho had been listening to this argument for 20 minutes while working on his third cup of soju. Finally, he looked up from his drink and interrupted both aliens. "You two sound exactly like my old neighbors back in Seoul," he said, his words slightly slurred but his tone matter-of-fact. "Mr. Kim and Mrs. Park lived next to each other for 15 years and fought constantly about a parking space between their apartments." Both aliens stared at him. The entire table went quiet. "Every morning, same argument," Park continued, gesturing with his cup. "Mr. Kim said the space was his because he moved in first. Mrs. Park said it belonged to both of them because it wasn't officially assigned. They'd yell at each other, leave angry notes, even called the police a few times." Admiral Greth's eyes narrowed. "We fail to see the relevance of this trivial domestic dispute." "Oh, it gets better," Park grinned. "This went on for years. Made everyone in the building miserable. Nobody could sleep because of the shouting. The other neighbors started taking sides. Kids were afraid to play outside because the adults were always angry." Whisper of Stars rippled with what might have been curiosity. "How was this conflict resolved?" "My grandmother lived in that building," Park said. "One day, she got fed up with all the noise. So she suggested they settle it with a race." The silence stretched longer. Several other conversations had stopped as aliens turned to listen. "A race?" repeated Admiral Greth slowly. "Simple contest. Both neighbors had to run around the block. Winner got to use the parking space on weekdays, loser got weekends. Fair, clear rules, everybody knows who won." "This is absurd," snorted the Admiral. "We are discussing territorial sovereignty, not playground games." "Are you?" asked Yang Hyojin, who had been quietly refilling drinks. "Because it sounds like you're both fighting over who gets to use the same space. Just like Mr. Kim and Mrs. Park." Park nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. And you know what happened after the race? Mr. Kim won, so he got weekdays. But then winter came, and Mrs. Park's car wouldn't start in the cold. So Mr. Kim started giving her rides to work. By spring, They were carpooling every day and the parking space didn't matter anymore. Whisper of Stars began to ripple in what the humans had learned was Halleck's laughter. This human suggests we resolve our ancient territorial dispute through a competition. Why not? Asked Lim Yoan from across the table. He had been quietly listening while cleaning his glasses. You're both warrior cultures, right? You understand contests of skill. Winner gets primary mining rights, loser gets secondary rights and a share of the profits. Clean, simple, everybody knows where they stand. Admiral Greth's expression was unreadable behind his battle helmet. You propose that the mighty Thorkhan Empire should race against these gaseous philosophers. Scared you'll lose? Asked Lee Mina innocently, appearing with a fresh bottle of soju. I mean, the Hallex folks do seem pretty fast when they want to be. The challenge hung in the air like a spark near fuel. Admiral Greth's pride warred visibly with his common sense. Around the table, representatives from other species leaned forward with interest. What manner of contest? He asked finally. Space racing, suggested Choi Daeho. Both sides provide their fastest ships. Best of 7 races through a neutral course. Winner gets primary access to the disputed territories, loser gets secondary access and 30% of all profits. Both sides get what they need, neither side loses face. Whisper of Stars rippled thoughtfully. This has merit. A test of skill rather than warfare. The territories would be used efficiently by whoever proves most capable. And if we win, rumbled Admiral Greth, the Hallex acknowledge Thorkhan's superiority in these regions. If you win, Whisper of Stars agreed, we acknowledge your greater skill at space racing. Nothing more, nothing less. 3 hours later, the Confederation's most persistent diplomatic crisis had been resolved through a drinking game, human common sense, and the simple observation that most conflicts are really just arguments about sharing. Word spread through the diplomatic station like wildfire. Other species began approaching the humans, not for formal mediation, but for what they were calling the human method, practical solutions wrapped in food, friendship, and surprisingly effective logic. 6 months later, Ambassador Vethtar walked through the corridors of the Galactic Confluence Station and barely recognized the place he had worked for 40 years. The sterile white walls were now covered with artwork from dozens of different worlds. The air carried the mixed scents of foods from across the galaxy. Most shocking of all, there was laughter echoing through halls that had once been silent except for whispered diplomatic conversations. He found Captain Lee Mina in what used to be Conference Room 7, now transformed into something the humans called the Break Room. She sat at a round table surrounded by young diplomats from 6 different species, teaching them a card game while simultaneously solving a trade dispute that had been stuck in committee for 3 months. Remember, full house beats are flush, she was saying to a young Kepler delegate whose tentacles kept trying to peek at other players' cards. And no, you cannot use psychic abilities to read minds. That is cheating, even if your species can do it naturally. Without missing a beat, she turned to 3 trade representatives who had been arguing for weeks about shipping routes between their systems. Have you tried simply splitting the routes by day of the week? Seems like you are all trying to use the same lanes at rush hour. Make a schedule, take turns, problem solved. The 3 aliens looked at each other with expressions that clearly said they felt stupid for not thinking of something so obvious. Within minutes, they were sketching out a rotation schedule on napkins. Captain Lee, Vethtar said, approaching the table. The Confederation Council has made their decision. They want to offer you the position of Chief Human Ambassador. She looked up from her cards, raising one eyebrow. Is that a fancy way of saying you want me to keep fixing problems that everyone else makes too complicated? Among other duties, yes. What is the dress code? Vethtar's translator paused, confused by the question. I am sorry, what do you mean? Clothes, Lee said patiently. Fancy uniforms, ceremonial robes, uncomfortable shoes? What do I have to wear for this job? Well, traditionally, Confederation ambassadors wear. Because I am not wearing anything with more than 4 buttons, Lee interrupted firmly. And if it needs special cleaning or cannot go through a normal washing machine, forget it. Also, there better be good coffee in this job, because that synthetic stuff you aliens drink tastes like motor oil mixed with disappointment. Around the room, other conversations continued in the relaxed, friendly atmosphere that had somehow become normal. In one corner, former enemies from the Outer Rim were sharing a meal and planning joint mining operations. Near the windows, a group of young diplomats was learning human games while discussing complex trade agreements like they were planning a neighborhood barbecue. Vethtar thought about the reports on his desk. Territorial disputes that had lasted centuries were being solved in afternoon meetings over coffee. Species that had not spoken to each other in decades were now working together on research projects. The Thorkenhelix racing competition had become so popular that 12 other territorial disputes were being settled the same way, with betting pools and celebration parties after each race. The Council is concerned about maintaining proper diplomatic protocols, he said carefully. Protocols are great, Lee replied, dealing another hand of cards. But results are better. How many real problems have been solved in the past 6 months compared to the 6 months before we showed up? Vethtar knew the answer. In the past half-year, more genuine progress had been made on galactic cooperation than in the previous decade. Not through formal treaties or lengthy negotiations, but through the simple human approach of treating everyone like potential friends and every problem like a puzzle that could be solved over a good meal. The numbers are impressive, he admitted. See? We get things done. Lee turned back to the young diplomats. Now, where were we? Oh right, the Kepler kid was trying to cheat at cards again. The tentacled youth rippled with embarrassment. I was not cheating. I was simply using my natural abilities. Using psychic powers to read cards is cheating, said a crystalline Vithari delegate, who would never have spoken so casually to another species 6 months ago. Even if it comes naturally to your people. Exactly, agreed Lee. Fair play means everyone follows the same rules, even if some of you have advantages others do not have. That is how cooperation works. It was such a simple concept, but Vethtar realized it had changed everything. The humans had not brought advanced technology or superior weapons to the Confederation. They had brought something much more powerful, the idea that different species could work together as equals, that problems were puzzles to be solved rather than battles to be won, and that the best diplomacy happened when people stopped worrying about being formal and started being genuine. There is one condition, he said finally. The Council insists on some formal ceremonies. The other species expect a certain level of dignity in their chief ambassador. Lee grinned and extended her hand in the gesture that had somehow become the standard greeting throughout the Confederation. As long as the ceremonies include good food and nobody has to stand around being bored for hours, I think we can work something out. As Vethtar shook her hand, he looked around at the transformed station. Species that had been enemies were now friends. Problems that had seemed impossible were being solved with common sense and good humor. The galaxy had not just gained a new member species, it had discovered that the best diplomacy was not about following ancient rules, but about treating people like people, no matter how many arms, tentacles, or eye stalks they might have. The humans had indeed changed everything, one shared meal and solved problem at a time.